Hello, State Fair judges. My name is Lucy Costello, and I'm an 8th grader in 4-H years from Cedar County. Today, I'm going to be doing a video as my write-up for my great-grandma's apple pie. The first step of making my pie is as simple as washing my hands for good sanitation. So now that I have my surface prepared and cleaned, I'm going to peel my apples, my Granny Smith apples, by putting them on the apple peeler. And then once my apple is peeled, I will dice it. I like to do mine in quarters and then put it into the bowl. Now that we have our apples diced, we will throw away our heap of peels. And now it's time to take a look at the recipe card to see what to do next. Okay, now that we have about 4 cups of apples diced, we are going to add 3 tablespoons of flour, 1, 2, and 3. Cinnamon to taste, and I like to add quite a bit of cinnamon, so I'm just going to use the teaspoon here, or tablespoon, sorry. And I'm just gonna add a little bit and just sprinkle it in. Quite a bit. And then we are also going to need 1 cup of sugar, and I'm using a 1/2 cup here. So we're going to do 2 of these. And our 2nd cup of sugar. Now I'm going to add just a drop of lemon juice to keep the freshness in the apples, especially since this is going to State Fair, which is about a week away. So now we're going to mix up all of our ingredients and make sure each apple is covered evenly with all of the ingredients. So throughout the years, I've made this pie for 5 years now. Throughout the years, I've always noticed that when I mix my ingredients, they always look dry. But I've also realized that when it sits in the fridge, which is the next step, the juice from the apples makes everything more moist. So that I've realized is not something to worry about. I'm now going to cover my bowl in foil and then put it in the fridge so then it stays cold while I make my crust. Now I'm gonna put my apple filling into the fridge for about an hour while I make my crust. Stop. Okay, so now we're gonna shred our butter, which is a very important step because we want our butter to be cold. And after I get this all shredded, I'm gonna put it back in the fridge so that it will stay even colder. Okay, so here we have our ingredients. For the rest of our dough, we have our flour here, ice cold water, vegetable shortening, and salt. And our butter is still chilling in the fridge. Now we're going to do 2.5 cups of spooned in flour over top of this. And then leveled off to make sure it is clean. Now that we have all of our flour in, we're going to add just a little bit of salt, just a pinch. So now we're gonna add our butter that is chilled, and then also 2/3 of a cup of Crisco or vegetable shortening. So I have a 1/3 measuring cup here, so I'm going to add 2 scoops of this, which I will then make sure I have the right amount using a knife. And then 1 more. My judge at the county fair instructed me that butter is used for flavor and vegetable shortening is used for texture. So I'm keeping that in mind while using this recipe. We are now going to mix this mixture up into small crumbles or chunks by using 2 forks because we do not own a pastry cutter. But I think the 2 forks works just as well. Now we are going to add little by little, just a little drop of ice cold water at a time, and stir it up with a rubber spatula until our dough turns into one big clump. So now I'm going to roll my dough into a ball, and every time I make it, my dough is just a little bit sticky, so I always put flour on my hands and on my surface, so then when I roll it, it doesn't stick. Okay, so now I have put my dough into the fridge, and now I'm going to check on my apples and stir them up to make sure that they look good. Okay, we have our surface that is all floured and our dough, which has been in the fridge for about 20 minutes. And now I'm going to roll this out into 2 6-inch discs, and I need to put flour on the top so that it doesn't stick to my rolling pin. So I'm gonna roll it out this way, cut it in half here, and then take each half, form it into a ball, like this. So I'll have 2 small balls. And then what I do is flatten the ball and roll it out into a 6-inch disc. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is put my discs into a Ziploc baggie. Usually I would use saran wrap, but we are out right now, so I'm just making do with what I have. But it is quite difficult to get these into the Ziploc bag, so bear with me here. Once we have them in our Ziploc bags, though, we will put them in the fridge to cool off for just a little bit longer. And then we will use these discs to roll them out to make our pie crust. Zip it up, shape it back a little bit because it gets a little wonky when you put it in the bag. And this will go into the fridge. Now we have reached the waiting part of making a pie. So now I just have to wait for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours for the pie crust discs to cool. And then I will be able to roll it out and make my pie and put it in the oven. Okay, so now our dough has been chilled for over 2 hours. So now we are going to put it into our pie tin here by putting it all at the bottom and then pressing it up on the sides. And if you need to, you can take some dough from the other disc, which is what I do quite a bit because my discs aren't quite even. So a tip that I like to use when making my pies is using cold water to smooth out the crust so then we don't have any holes or like big spots where you can tell that the pie has just been shoved together. Okay, so now that we have our crust put into our pie tin, we are now going to add not the apples, but just a little bit of juice to the bottom, like this, because I like to do this before I bake the crust just for a little bit, so then you get like a caramelized texture on the bottom. I did this at the county fair, and it was more of an experiment then, but I have now realized that I think this is a good technique that I will use moving forward. Our pie crust has came out of the oven after 5 minutes, and now we're gonna add our apples to the shell. I was just a little bit worried when I pulled it out of the oven because the crust looked pretty funny, but then I remembered that it's barely even cooked, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm using this spatula with the holes in the bottom to make sure that I don't get too much juice so that it's not leaking or soggy on the bottom. Okay, so now we've reached the final step of baking a pie, the baking. So what I'm going to do is put my pie in for 10 minutes at 350 and then bump it up for another 45 or so minutes at 400 degrees. But it really depends on your oven, so watch your pie and make sure it doesn't overcook. Thank you so much for watching. State Fair judges, I really hope you liked my presentation today and the taste of my pie. Thank you.